Hey, I want to welcome everybody to the Sacramental Charismatic. I am your host, Luke Garrity, and I am coming live from Northern California, where it is currently, I think, in the mid-60s. Wasn't sunny this morning, so I can't throw that in anybody's face. But for those of you anywhere else in the country that are currently enjoying snowstorms and blizzards and things like that, I'm praying for your soul, and I hope that you are able to make it. Anyway, it is my pleasure today to continue doing the podcast. And for those of you who have been listening, for the month of February, it's Black History Month, and my good friend Ramon had mentioned a idea about having different Black voices on for Black History Month, and thought that'd be a great thing to do. And so I've had Ramon on, I had my friend Edgar on, and today I have a great guest, someone who I have known for, I don't even know how long I've known her, and I don't know where we even met. I was actually trying to figure it out. I think it was some Vineyard event or something like that. But I do know that she is an amazing human being, and I'm super excited to have my friend Stephanie Snow on the podcast. Stephanie, what's up?
Hello, good morning from cold, snowy Chicago. Since you launched and led with that, we are getting yet another round of snow. And so this is the time of year where I'm pretty tapped out. But thank you for your prayers for our soul.
I pray for you every day. I lift up the Midwest.
We appreciate you, and thank you for not mentioning that there may be sun or there was sun. You're such a good friend.
Well, you know, I was in Minnesota last week, and it just happened to be like every time I go to Minnesota to visit my family, it's always the coldest it's been for a really long time. So it was like negative 17 at night, and I had my heater at 85 in the little place I was staying.
Oh,
it's crazy. I know. I had to have something to keep me warm.
Yeah.
I was all by myself. Hey, Stephanie. So I think we've. I was actually trying to figure out like where we met it. Was it at one of the Vineyard conferences or?
I think we originally met at the South Suburban Vineyard. So I think Gino had invited you to preach one Sunday that he was out or something like that. I think that's
he was on sabbatical. That's right.
I think right. So that's the first time we met, and then we connected again at a Vineyard conference. I think one of the Columbus ones, maybe.
I think so.
That had to be like 20.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, it's been at least 4 or 5 years, I think.
Yeah, because I do remember now. It was because Angel Voice. I don't even know that lady's name at your church, but Angel Voice. I just call her Angel Voice.
Alicia. It's Alicia you're thinking about. Yep, it's Alicia. I can't wait to tell her that, because then we saw each other together in Columbus. We were all together again in Columbus. Yeah.
That's all I call her. I don't even know her name. That sounds terrible, but I'm like, when I saw Gino somewhat recently, like maybe 2 years ago, I was like, how's Angel Voice?
I can't wait to tell her that and that we know who you're talking about. Yeah. I listen to Alicia almost every day on one of the Vineyard projects, so it's lovely. Her voice is beautiful.
That's great. Well, so you have been in the Vineyard, which is the church tradition that I'm a part of as well. I grew up in, and you've been in it. And the Vineyard movement has historically been primarily white folk. Soft rock from Southern California. It's kind of the surfer craze. I don't know. There's all these things that we are, or we have been. But you've been in the Vineyard for a while now, and you're also involved, I know, with the Vineyard Justice Network. You've participated in their conferences and things like that, I believe. And then you also are involved in social justice, biblical social justice. The whole gamut in your local church there in Chicago. In addition to maybe fleshing that out a little bit, what are some other things that would be important for our viewers and listeners to know about you?
Yeah. That's it. I am an attorney. So vocationally, I get to do justice every day. And we can probably dig into that a little bit later. I'm an attorney as my second career. And so I didn't finish law school and take the bar exam until I turned 40. And so my story leading to that actually starts with the Vineyard. And it starts or at least this part of my history starts with the Vineyard at the South Suburban Vineyard, which was the first Vineyard church that I attended. It was my introduction to the movement, and so.
Can I just add really quickly, just to put in context for the church you're in? Led senior pastor is an African American named Gino,
right, and his wife Shannon.
Yeah. And is Shannon are they co-lead? I actually didn't
They
know that
are.
if they
They're
are. Oh,
co-lead
okay.
pastors, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think
I'm
Shannon's.
sorry, Shannon. My wife is in a cohort with them, or with Shannon. So I should probably know
So
that. But great
yeah,
people. Yeah.
yeah.
So in the context there, though, is like when I preached there, it was super diverse. A lot
Yep,
of African
yep,
Americans, a lot of Latinos, a
sure.
lot of well, there's a lot of white people there too. It
There
wasn't
is
like there was
it's multi-ethnic,
multi.
which is and
Yeah.
here's why I start there because that was my intro to the Vineyard. And so
Yes. I just
I
wanted to put that in context.
yeah, let's put this in context because I did not know until Gino being the good leader that he is, he saw leadership in me and began to train me up and he took me to a Vineyard conference. And it wasn't until my first Vineyard conference that I was like, oh, nationally the movement seems to be a bit less diverse, I'll say that,
Hmm.
than what I had experienced in my local context. And so that was my introduction to the Vineyard. It was at that first conference actually that I sat in a class led by May Cannon about
Mm.
biblical justice. And it was there that I've always had a passion for justice. I always knew internally that it was a good thing, but I thought it was separate from the church, separate from what like that God was doing, which is
Mm.
historically not even accurate from what I remember from my childhood. I grew up in the Black church, but there had been a disconnect somehow when I
Mm.
first engaged in white evangelical space rather.
Hmm.
But at that conference, May taught this class, and I just remember her saying, justice is God's idea, and it lit a fire.
Mm.
It lit a fire in me. It really, really did. And so I've been on this journey. To live the life of Micah 6:8, the great requirement, as it's called, to do justice and to love mercy and to
Hmm.
walk humbly with God. And so that started there. It started at that Vineyard. I had started law school during that time in the city and ended up moving back into the city, into Chicago. So the South Suburban Vineyard is in the South suburbs of Chicago. I moved back to the city and started going to the Hyde Park Vineyard Church with Rand
Mm.
and Amy Tucker. They're also co-pastors, co-lead pastors. And that's where I am now. And it's there that I lead the Justice and Reconciliation Ministry team. And so I say all of that to say that I get to do this vocationally at work as an attorney, but also through the church, in the church, through the local church, which is where I think we get to practice this and do this.
Mm.
Yeah. And so yeah, I think the local church is the base of where we're sent out to do all of these things, right? And so
Hmm.
I'm sent from the local church into the marketplace, into community, into my workplace, to do this, which is the Lord's work,
That's
which is his
amazing.
heart. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool when you have congruency in your vocation with what you're passionate about,
yeah,
and what you're. I mean, I think that there's a lot of pastors. Hopefully, that would be true.
yeah,
Hopefully their vocation and their passions are congruent. But it's also amazing when or I always feel like it's such a important thing to have people in the church, in the local church, that are actively engaged in kingdom ministry, or
yeah.
however you want to refer to it, in their vocation, though,
Mhm.
which, I know a lot of people throw a lot of shade on John Calvin for a lot of different reasons. But one of the things I love about John Calvin is that he's oftentimes, only known for his theology of predestination
Mhm.
and things like
Mhm.
that. But, he really wrote a lot on just, I guess, recovering vocation as calling,
Sure,
like,
sure.
hey, if you're a butcher, do butchery to
To
the
the glory
glory
of
of
God.
God. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of
Yeah.
cool. So you also need to mention your furry friend, because I feel like if you don't, I will lose my marbles.
Yeah, and you'll get a text later. So, and here's another just what's on brand.
I'll get a text from your cat. That's the problem. It's
That is it.
awkward.
That is it. So my cat, his name is Thurgood Marshall Snow, and so that's so completely on brand. And I tell people who are just meeting me, like, that should tell you everything you need to know about me. I love
Yeah.
history. I love the law. I love Black lawyers and judges. It's all come together in my furry friend. And so he goes by Thurry, but his majestic judicial name is Thurgood Marshall Snow. And he's added to my bios these days. When people ask me about me, I tell them I love to read, I love justice, I love
Yeah.
watching documentaries, I love doing puzzles, and I love my Thurry. And so, he appreciates this opportunity to have a little shine.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, as you know, I'm not a cat fan in normal
Well,
life.
yeah, you
I
say
haven't
that.
been.
Yeah.
No, I had. Well, here, this is what I'm saying. Like, I had like a rule at our house, and I found out, by the way, I can make rules in my house, and my wife and my daughters do not care. They do not care at all about those rules.
Yeah.
So my rule was no cats, and it's probably because, well, it's mostly because I'm allergic to them.
Mm.
And so we got our first cat about 2 years ago, and then we just got a new cat. And I actually like them. I'm not going to lie. I don't want my
Yeah.
wife to know that because I still have to be like, but I also found the more that I'm trying, but I found out that the more I'm around the cats, the more I'm not allergic to them anymore because they're getting all their dander or whatever on me. Yeah, so they're pretty interesting. Yeah, I'm more. I like dogs probably better because they're compliant, whereas cats are like, no.
Yeah, it's more of a give and take with Thurry. Like, I pretend that I'm in charge, and he pretends to allow me to be, and so it's a give and take.
It's a game. Yeah, it's exactly. That's awesome. So you've I always like to when I think about Gino or your church, I have nothing. I actually wrote something for Multiply Vineyard a long time ago about my experience at the South Suburban Vineyard because I was really moved by it. Because growing up in the Vineyard, I wouldn't say I was aware that it was only white people mostly. I mean, I think the vineyards I went to always had more diversity in them because of their location. But it's also been pretty well known that it was mostly white people. It's just interesting because it raises all these different things about your childhood and the assumptions you have. But at the church you were a part of, at Gino's church, clearly intentional about ethnic diversity and cultural diversity. And like ethnic diversity, I think for me, in my understanding, is always a little bit easier, just a little bit, than cultural diversity. Because cultural diversity is like, how do you do that well when there's all these different cultures and whatnot? But I do know that, my time there was really moving, to see such a diverse community of people pursuing Jesus and on mission together. And so a shout out to that church. That's a great church.
Absolutely. And the diverse leadership, right? Like you said, that was very intentional. And I'm really thankful. I think it providential, of course, that like that's the vineyard that I started at, right? That was my entree into the vineyard. And then being at the Hyde Park Vineyard now, which is also very diverse, also a multi-ethnic community, that it's helpful for me to see the vineyard through those lenses, right? Even as aspirationally, I think that's the word I want to say. Like, we can move there and we can do this. I do think there is something to be said about churches being planted intentionally from a diverse place and with the goal that we are going to be a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-generational, this is what we're going to do at an embryonic stage. That being said, I still think that we can still make movement even in churches, local churches that have not started there. It's a steeper hill to climb, right? It's going to take some extra doses of grit and prayer and asking for the Spirit's help, but it can be done. So I just think these churches are great models, right? And I'm thankful to have been a part of them. I still consider the SSV family, and to be at the Hyde Park Vineyard, it's the same. Similar.
That's great. When you talk about so my observations, and I think that's what I wrote this article on, was just my observations about that church. It seemed very intentional about diversity, because I think you're right. The only, maybe this is not the best way to put it, but it felt like there was equal representation, across the spectrum. I mean, there were just lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds who were leading, so it just felt very much, I don't know, it was like a one big heaven family, I guess, is the the cheesiest way to put it. What would you say are, like, going into a church plant, which Gino and Shannon they were intentional from the very beginning. I know that story. But what would you say, like, for a church that's already in existence, that they really feel like compelled by the Holy Spirit, they feel compelled by the cultural moment we're in to become more intentional about being diverse? What would you say, like, are the top three things, just off the top of your head?
Yeah. I don't even know that I can do off the top of my head, because I think it's kind of tricky.
You're like, hold on, let me get my notebook,
Let
and
me
you've
get
got
my notebook.
100.
I have 102. I am a lawyer, so if you ask for 3, I'm going to give you 10.
Exactly.
Keep the 7 you don't need. I was just having a conversation with a pastor who's a friend of mine about this, and his church is non-diverse at this time, but they want to move in that direction, right? And I give this advice as a layperson. It's like, you are at some point going to have to make a decision to add diverse people to your staff. And I was I said that, and I what I really meant was, I mean, add a Black person to your staff. I mean, add a Black woman to your staff, which is really what I meant. And so I think the problem is where that can feel or become like tokenization. So wrestling with that tension, and I don't have all of the answers to that. But we do serve a spirit who gives wisdom, right? And so I think that that's the one thing I would say. Like, there needs to be people of color, and Black people specifically, I think, in leadership positions. And in the Vineyard specifically, I would love to see more Black women in lead pastor positions and in leadership nationally. So that's one thing. I love to read, so anyone who knows me knows that this is coming. But I think there's a lot to be said about doing research and gaining knowledge and learning, right? Like, oftentimes we just don't really want to do the work of the learning about other people, other ethnicities, other cultures, learning history. And I know we're going to go there in a minute, but there's a lot to be said. Like, if you learn the history of what you're dealing with Black people, with Asian Americans, with Latino and Latina Americans, with other cultures, like, that's going to do a lot, right? Like, it'll open up empathy. It will open up understanding. So make the leaders read. I just, it's a thing where it's like, if you could read a book or something, even read an extra long article about this, then we can have a conversation. And so I think that would be important. And then, this is not a cop out. I do think we need to pray a lot more about this, right? About how to do this corporately, how to do this as a people, right? As covenant people, how do we do this together? I do think it starts at the local church, but we're doing this as a people, right, Luke? Like, and I'm an American, so I have a tendency towards individualism, and there's a part of me that wants to run out and fix it all myself, or I can fix this. I can do diversity for the church. I can do justice for the church. I can be the justice gal. I can do that. But that's not that's not what we see biblically. We're called to do this as a people. And so I think praying about how we engage together. I know that unity is a really funky word to use. And so I mean biblical unity when I say unity, not a false peace type of unity, but seeking the Spirit on how to do this together as a people with these diverse backgrounds.
I think the unity thing is, it's interesting, because I was at a pastor's meeting one time, and I can't remember how I worded it, but I was talking about how solidarity, that was the word I used. I was talking about how I was hoping that our churches could have some solidarity on some things, and one of the pastors there was like, solidarity is a political word, only Paul, and I was like, huh. And so I think that the word unity and solidarity probably are they mean different things. Well, it's like anybody, right? The way that I use words and the way you use words may be different. You're a lawyer, you're probably doing it right. I'm not. I'm probably using it wrong. But we use words differently, and context matters and whatnot. But I was like, man, I was really struck by that, because I then was fascinated by that perspective, I guess, because it seems like, from a really conservative, evangelical, anti-politic type of perspective, solidarity is something to avoid, and we should only be about unity, which, maybe that is, helpful for some people. But I think it's interesting that unity is so monolithically assumed to be, we all have to agree about everything. Where there's a difference to be in unity and not have uniformity, though.
Sure.
We don't have to dress the same, look the same, talk the same, etc. But I was struck by this yesterday as I was preparing for our message. We talked about about love because it was Valentine's Day, and we tried to do it in a way that did not
course.
marginalize or make an idol of family and
Thank you.
marriage.
As a single woman, as your single sister, I definitely appreciate that.
Just want to let you know that we did clarify that multiple times, because I think that it's interesting how the history of Saint Valentine, it's not all about marriage and love.
Right.
It's about love in a biblical concept, but it's interesting to me how in John 13 and John 17, Jesus connects unity and love in a really particular way. And I almost get the same feeling when you're reading Ephesians chapter 3, where Paul's praying that we would know the height, the width, the length, the depth of God's love. It has to be like, because we're in unity with God, like we understand how he feels for us. So it seems like when you talk about unity, like it's connected to love. And if we want to be more loving to our neighbors, our diverse neighbors, then we have to pursue some sense of unity and commonality, I guess. So I think that's I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I just one last thing. I just finished Compassion and Conviction, the book written by the AND campaign. It's about civic engagement, but I was really struck at one of the and it is a book I recommend. Of course, I'm going to have book recommendations throughout this.
Wanting you to
know that that is my that's my bag.
And
but
just to clarify really quickly about that, there will be a link in the description for all the books that you mentioned. So this book right here is which book?
It's Compassion and Conviction from the AND campaign.
Okay, Compassion and Conviction. There will be a link in the description, and if you use my link, I will get an affiliate commission so I can purchase more books. So for all my listeners, please do that.
Oh, that's good to know. That's good to know for future reference, Luke. But they talk a lot about like how we can approach relationships with people who are different and diverse, even from how we think politically, ideologically, even theologically, but towards a common goal, right? And so even tearing down the expectation that we have to agree 100%, even with the person sitting right next to me, well, pre-COVID, the person sitting right next to me in the pew, right? That we can approach and be unified biblically, even without agreeing about everything, as long as we agree about the main things, right? As long as we agree about the main things, but approaching it. And I just love how they lay this out, right? That we can, and it even brought some conviction to me, right? That I can be unified with you, working for the good of my neighbor, right? Of our sisters and brothers, to seek shalom, to seek the peace of our cities, right? Without saying that we agree on everything. And so I just found that really helpful in reframing and helping me where I may have been like, well, they don't agree with me about everything. I shall no longer follow them on Twitter. They don't agree with me on everything. You know, there are some lines in the sand that I will draw, right? But, you know, for the most part, we can probably do a lot better.
I don't know the gentleman's name right now, but I just saw recently somewhere that documentary. You probably have heard about that guy who's an African American who goes to KKK meetings and like has tried to befriend the KKK world. So I would love to know your thoughts on that, because watching it, I was just like, whoa. But he had this interview and he was just talking about how he didn't agree with like anything that they were doing at all. But he was like, I'm trying to form a relationship. So I get the feeling from most of the African American people I know, they're like, why would you do that?
Yeah, so like, that's my line. Like I have a line.
Flesh that out. Yeah.
So I just want to say,
KKK's your line. KKK's my line.
Yeah, there's a line. Again, I haven't watched it, and so I don't like to. But even that's saying something, right? I had heard about it, but chose not to watch it. So that should tell you a little bit about. But I'm not. What I'm saying is, I do think, for me and my lines, I'm practicing learning running those things like through a more Christ-like, Christianly lens, right? But still knowing where my lines and where my boundaries are, and what my And
would you agree? Would you agree that that people will have different lines though too, and that's part of that's part of what you're talking is having a context where like one African American man feels compelled. I haven't watched the whole thing, but I'm putting, so I might be making things up right now, but who feels compelled to like he feels compelled to love So much so that he believes that love is a way to impact the
Yeah.
KKK members. And I think there's fruit of that too, if I remember correctly, like he's actually seen people come out of that. But that might not be the same line for yourself or for
Stephanie
other
and
people.
No, right? That may not be the line for Stephanie.
Yeah, you might smack someone. I mean,
it just may be a different experience. And the fruit, there's some good fruit back. But yeah, I think that's right, and it leads me also to like, one of my pet peeves, if you were, is like, and a lot of people said this, like, Black people, we're not a monolith, right? And so I think you're right. There's room for there to be some where we might go about things in different ways, if that makes sense. For me, though, I just want to see good welfare, shalom done to my neighbors. I really, really want to live out the great requirement, the great commandment, right? I really want to figure out a way every day to love my neighbors as myself, and then to like, what does that look like practically, boots on the ground, right? And that's where I'm saying, in a local church, we need to really figure out a way to do that from a place of unity. I don't have a problem with the word solidarity, right?
I found most people of color don't. Honestly, like that was what was shocking to me, because I honestly, and this just happened like within the last year.
Yeah.
So I had never encountered someone who had a problem with the word solidarity, just because I think it might also be a generational thing too.
Sure.
Which we're on that. We're Gen Xers, so now we're considered old by my kids. Just so you know, we're old. Yeah, right. My kids, but it's interesting how when I think of the word solidarity, it really conjures up feelings for me that are similar to empathy. That like having solidarity with a perspective or a movement or a person does not mean that I have to agree with every single thing that they say or do. Like, I think Black Lives Matter is one that I hear a lot of my conservative African American friends talk about. I was talking to one just recently who he was telling me that like we were talking about how the validity of the Black Lives Matter hashtag is. I have no problem with that. He has no problem with it, but he has massive concerns about the movement itself. And it's like, that's a perfect example of, I think, how a lot of people have solidarity with something, but then they also have questions about others. Sure. And it feels like, especially with the older generations, which I'm not part of that. We're not there.
Let's clarify.
But it was like with that line of thinking, it was just fascinating to me how solidarity for them conjures up like not sticking to your convictions and not I don't know what you think about that, but does that feel similar?
A little bit, yeah, I think so. And I've had similar conversations with people, other African Americans, about movements that they're like, well, I can't check off every box, but I can affirm what's good. And I think you know that phrase, like, the eat the meat, spit out the bones.
Very popular in the Vineyard.
It is very popular in the Vineyard, but I've had to like apply and kind of remind people about that. Like, don't just apply that with your pet to your pet projects, right? Like, why can't that same grace, if you will, be applied to things like Black Lives, the movement, right? If that's what the issue is. But again, can we affirm what's good? Can we affirm what's going to move forward a biblical and Christian like sense of good to neighbors, and then not? And that's another thing. I'm not being paid by the AND campaign to promote this book, but that's just another thing they talk about. Like, how do we?
But if you buy it from me, I will get a kickback. So please do so.
And he's not kicking back any of that to me. So I'm just saying, it's really.
I'll throw you a gift card.
And so. I think that's good. I would love to, sit with that a little bit more. But I just think we can affirm what's good, right? And that we could probably move forward together a little more.
I wonder if I had this. I really, man, you just said so many things that I'm like, gosh, we could have like 18 podcasts on, because I want to talk about tokenism, because I that's a concern I have. A little bit, and so let me flesh this out a little bit, and then I want you to like kick it back to me and like help me out, share what you're thinking on this stuff too. So like the tokenism thing is interesting, because when Ramon had suggested to me, hey, I'd love to be, because I've been asking him to be on my podcast forever.
Sure.
And he has this book, it just came out Reclaiming
Yes,
Diversity.
I have
Fantastic.
it.
Link in the bio. Yeah, I
Yeah.
just I read it this week. He had sent me a copy of it. I didn't know that though. I feel so bad. He sent me a
I heard
copy.
that on the podcast. I heard you all
Well,
fleshing that out at
I
the
know
podcast.
I got two emails though. Okay, I got one that had the first chapter, and that's the one I read, and I was like, oh my gosh, so good. And then he's like, I sent you the whole book.
I
Yeah, I
heard
was like,
all of
no.
it. I heard it all on the podcast. I love that you all
So
fleshed that out.
I bought it. Okay,
Yeah,
I want to say I bought
as
it,
well.
and I
Yeah.
read it, and it's fantastic. I mean, it is a thorough history of the church. Like, I don't want to just say Black history. It is
Yeah.
a history of the church.
Globally.
I think everybody needs to read it. But well, I was struck by something he said, because he was like, yeah, I think I'd like to do the interview. Maybe we could do it for Black History Month. And I was like, that's a fantastic idea. In fact, I want to try to have, Black voices for February. And then I was like, but you know what? I don't want my listeners to think that it's like this token.
Right.
Okay, Black voices just in February.
We have discussed a little bit, or there has been some communication, right?
Yes. And I'm like, I don't want it to be that, because I want to be more intentional with having, because my major passion right now that I'm exploring is, so I'm 25% Japanese, which I think I told you that before. And there is almost no, I don't even know how to say it, but it just feels like Asian Americans are totally the overlooked minority group in a lot of different conversations about race and ethnicity and diversity. And then with the quote unquote China virus language, it's been terrible for a lot of Asian Americans. I really want to do some more about that. Well, there is an Asian American and Pacific Islanders month. And I'm like, okay, so I'm going to have some voices there.
Yeah.
And so I want to take advantage of these things that are built. Right? Yeah. Opportunities that are built into our society that allow us to do that. But at the same time, be very intentional to go beyond that. So like in June, Stephanie, I would love to have you on my podcast or whatever. But help me out with that. Like, what are your thoughts when it comes to tokenism and like, what's the appropriate? Because I feel like there may be some African American people who right now feel like, okay, so the Sacramental Charismatic has Black voices on during February, but that's just, another example of not getting it.
No, I think right. That's really valid, right? And it's one of the things that
feels like it.
I brought up in a short email to you, right? I think it's great. Like, I think it's great that if this is the first opportunity to highlight Black voices, I think that's well and good. I think it's great. I also think it would be great to have more Black voices, Asian voices, Latino throughout the podcast, throughout the life of the podcast. So here I'm like, both, and it can never be enough, right? It can never be. Let's do this. Let's make this a part of what we do, a part of what you do. I love highlighting Black voices for Black History Month. I just did the same thing. I sent an email to Rand and Amy, who, let's just go ahead and give them a quick shout out, just because I send them lots of emails. It's a part of
the shout out for them answering their emails,
for them responding to and receiving the grace of emails that I send them.
Yeah, I like how you sent me an email right after you had heard that I hate email. That was great.
I did. I wanted to dig into that. Like, let's practice. Let's see if we can.
I need healing.
Yeah, so we're gonna practice this. But like I said, hey, Women's History Month is next month, right? Yeah. AAPI month is coming up. Especially like you mentioned, recently there's been an uptick in violence against Asian Americans, right? And so I said, hey, I would love to have a guest speaker for that month who is Asian American, right? And so again, both and, right? And then the response was yes, right? Yes, let's do this. Let's use these opportunities, but the church should also be leading in this area. So we should just find a way to do more throughout the year. So my short answer is both and, right? Like, that's one way that we can.
How Vineyard of you.
How I'm trying, Luke. I'm trying. You know my bits. I'm still new Vineyard. Relatively speaking. So I think that's a way to do that. But here's one thing I would say about tokenism. Have you heard of Erwin Ence's book, The Beautiful Community?
I don't know. That it sounds somewhat familiar.
Sure. So I just started it via audiobook. And just this morning, he was telling the story of a Black woman who was asked by her church to lead this justice and mercy team, right? She checked some boxes. She was Black. She was a woman. She had a master's degree. But she ended up feeling tokenized. And what it boiled down to was the lack of relationship, right? Like they didn't know anything about her. Like she wasn't seen or known for who she was, but what she could do in that role. And she also looked good in the role, right? It looked good that they had a Black woman in this position. And so that resonated with me. And I think that's just one thing to consider, right? As we're saying, yeah, you do need to put more people of color in these positions, but to make sure that we're seeing the people that we're putting in this position and to check our motives, right? Like to just make sure we're running our motives through the checks of the Spirit, right? That create me a clean heart, right? Like that, and that we're honest and upfront. Like, hey, ma'am, we know that we've never had a Black person in any position of leadership.
Yeah.
We understand. Here's what we're going to do to help you relationally and help you even be the only Black person in leadership at this church, which is its own mantle, right? And so I don't want to make light of tokenism because I think it's a real thing. I'm still wrestling through this too. Like, what does it look like for a church to be intentional about this, right? To recognize like, this is a problem that's only going to be solved when we solve the problem and do the thing, but also realizing the weight that's on leaders of color when they're in these roles, right?
Yeah.
If you happen to have an Enneagram 3, for those of you familiar with the Enneagram, who's an achiever, right, in a role like this, like what's the extra weight now that's on that person to perform? So yeah, I think it's a nuance. I don't know. Does that answer a little bit of your question?
Well, I think it definitely. Well, I think it definitely is helpful to think about how. I mean, when you said earlier, because this is something I've told many people. It's not like any community, not whether it's the African American community, the Asian American community, the Latino American community. Like it's not monolithic. You're going to find people that are all over the map. So some people will feel very much like they're being used as a token, and other people will be like, absolutely, I'd love to take that opportunity. Right? Yeah, it's just, and I think a lot of it sometimes. Well, maybe it feels like a lot of it will depend on what the past experiences have. Like if you always feel like you're a token, how would you not, that might conjure up every single time there's an opportunity. It's a triggering
thing. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of funny at the last national conference, there was a women's thing. I don't know, women's lunch or whatever. And so somebody asked me to be the dude. And I was like, wait a minute. Like, am I a token guy? I was the token guy. And it was like, yeah. And I was like, this is kind of cool. This is awesome.
Right?
Opportunity. But here's the thing. I realized this is that I felt like it was an opportunity to talk about like biblical scholarship out there and theological resources that would empower women to be in senior leadership roles. So I was happy to do it. But then I also would say I've never, ever been treated like just a token dude for most of my life, so it didn't conjure up those feelings.
Baggage, right? You didn't have they were not
this last, this is to my lack of empathy and shame. I had a conversation with somebody who is an African American leader, and it was right after the George Floyd murder had happened, and you and I, we're talking a lot during that time. Well, not a lot, but we were talking and just kind of processing things. And I reached out to a person because I had connected with them a few times already. Like we had previous social media interaction, and they had participated in writing a paper that was like a fantastic paper like 3 or 4 years ago, and I'd asked for a copy of it several times and hadn't. And at that time I reached out to them. I said, hey, I just was curious, do you still have that paper? And then just got the way it felt was taking a task about asking for something from them. And I'm always, white people are always using Black people, and it was like felt very much out of the blue for me because I was like, what are you? I thought we were cool, like I'm not that dude. I thought I wanted your paper 3 years ago.
Right.
But at the moment when I backed up, I was like, okay, like this is a cultural moment right now there's a process going on in this person who I don't know. I mean, I can't say that we have a relationship,
Right.
Like we don't talk all the time. And so before I responded to how I was feeling originally, I was like, okay, so I think I wasn't very empathetic about the whole context of this person because I don't know anything about them.
Right.
So I think obviously it revealed that their experience thus far had been really negative about people asking them for resources that were white. That's the best way to put it.
Yeah, right, which makes sense. And around that time,
Totally.
like I was hearing a lot from my um, uh, Black sisters and brothers who were receiving lots of calls along those lines,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Like,
Hey,
hey,
you're Black.
you're Black. I do recall that you're Black, and I remember you saying something about.
I just recently noticed you're Black.
There was
Yeah.
there's a funny line in a recent SNL episode they did about like allies or something. And someone said something along the lines of, yeah, remember when racism started back last summer? And that's how it felt for a lot of like
That's so bad.
a lot of people. It was so bad, but I was like, it was so true, because it felt for a lot of people who, had been kind of beating the drum, like there are justice issues, like Black lives are being killed, Black bodies are being murdered, like we are hurting, you're ignoring us. Then to get like so can you send me your scholarship? And I get it. I'm just saying it makes sense, but there's also, there was a weariness. Complex. It was complex, and there was like grieving and all of that.
I think like, as trying to be a ally, like it shouldn't always have to be African Americans who are telling everybody what books to read and right. Like I get that too. In fact, I had this thought. I was sitting in bed this morning, and I woke up, and I was just thinking about, so I have this cup. There's this really great company that I've been buying stuff from. They just have stickers, but they're really focused on social justice. The Happy Givers. I don't know if you've heard of them, but yeah, I'll send you a link after this. But I have this cup, and it says, "If you are more fortunate than others, build a longer table, not a taller fence." And I love that concept. And I was thinking about privilege because, I've had a lot of privilege in my life, and I think oftentimes it's felt like, there's a lot of conversations about what do you do with privilege, right? And how you should feel, like the whole concept of white guilt and white privilege, and all these conversations have been happening for a very long time, but definitely nationally in the last year, right? If you listen to hip hop, these are not new, and I grew up listening to hip hop, so it's kind of like, hey guys, there's definitely some challenges in the world we live in. It's been like that for a long time, not just the last year.
Not just this last year, yeah.
Yeah. But I was thinking about the whole concept of privilege. Like, really for me, I've been just trying to be more intentional about using the privilege I have and I've had to be able to help others. Cause I just think this right here, this cup, I love it. The idea of not, and this company, they're focused on social justice work in Ethiopia, Puerto Rico, and I think another company too, but everything they do, funds go to the social justice work they do. So I shout out to them. In fact, I'm trying to get their owner on a podcast episode because I think it'd be really fun to hear from them. But but that whole idea of using privilege and blessings and opportunities and whatever it is to help people just goes back for me to the biblical concept of we've been blessed to be a blessing, which I think is like goes back to Abraham. Abraham's blessing. Sure. Yeah, and so it's so hard and complex, I think, for a lot of people, because sometimes when you try to be a blessing or you're trying to use your privileges to help people, if you're not really intentional or thoughtful about it, you can actually do more damage.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I see that a lot with short missions trips. Like I used to do these short mission trips, and it was like after my second or third one, I was like, I think we're actually hurting more than we're helping.
Yeah.
So what do you think about, like, what are your thoughts on some of that? Like, what does that conjure up in your thinking?
Yeah. I don't know. A few things, like the helping more than you're hurting. Here's what just stood out from what you said. I think the thoughtfulness and the just stopping and taking a step back, right? Like there's what's the Bible verse about zeal without knowledge?
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes, and some people like to give people the benefit of the doubt, which I really do try to do. Like it's coming from this place of, okay, here's a problem. I am now awake to the problem. I see that there's a problem. I'm ready to jump in and do something. And there's a bit of like the white savior mentality that'll kind of,
Mhm.
which is what I thought of a little bit when you mentioned, these missions trips. And
That's exactly what it is.
yeah, and so I think a lot of it came from that place. But again, there was no knowledge of how that is harmful, because we as the church, we as the American church, specifically the white evangelical church, we've just not done the work in this for the most part. For the most part, we have not done the real work, which is why then you have this entire body of people who were ready to engage in the same methods of before that are just not good for people of color, for their Black brothers and sisters. And so I don't think this is an answer to your question. These are more my free-flowing thoughts.
Yeah, that's what I want. Yeah, keep going.
The caffeine has just kicked in. But I think there's a part of me that says, like, the local church, this is a local church issue, right? Like, the local church needs to equip people and send them out better equipped, right? Like, this needs to be done in small groups. It needs to be, taught from the pulpit. There needs to be examples, right? Like, if I'm a person sitting, I need to see an example of how this is being done correctly, how this is being done right, without me, doing harm, like emailing my friend and triggering something, or putting more pressure on the Black people in my life to fix this thing and tell me what to do and tell me what to read. And I'm not saying, like, if there are friendships, like, I have really good friends who reached out to me during that time that we already had, like, there was relational equity built up. We had already been, and I don't like this phrase very much anymore, we had already been doing life together, right? Like, so there was foundation there. So I absolutely responded to their text saying, yes, I feel horrible right now. This is really bad. But if you want to do something, read this. Here are the people you should be listening. I think you should be listening to right now. Here are the voices that you should be amplifying. Here's a lament that you can read on Sunday. Here's how you can enter. I was happy to do that. It was more challenging, though, when there was no relational equity. There was nothing there, right? And then it's like, oh, now you want to come in and fix it. Using, yeah. So I do have a lot. I still think I think in many ways I'm still processing 2020 and all that happened. Join the club, right? Like, join the club. But just even how the church responded. And there were some really good things. Like, there were some marches here in Chicago that, I was happy to see happen, right? Like, I was happy to see churches mobilize and stand together and say, this is it. Like, I was happy to see that the proverbial straw had broken a little bit, right? But I was also grieved that it took that, right? Like, that it's like we've been, yeah. So that's that's my response to everything that you said. These things are complex and nuanced, and then
I love how you're
right. Like, some of this stuff is hard and easy at the same time, or hard and simple, I guess is what I'll say. Like, even though some things are complex and need nuance, some things are really simple, right?
Yeah.
And so, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I mean, I think, going at things from a relational manner is definitely, well, that's what my observation over the last, year. Well, no, not even last year. That's, I'd say, my whole life.
Yeah.
Like, when all of my friends that are people of color, we have relationships, so we can have conversations, and they know I love them. I know they love me. We can agree to disagree. We can, we're like wrestling through things together, but like, we're good. Like, we're friends. We have relationship. Whereas I think for probably a lot of people, last year was an awakening, to use that language somewhat. There was definitely people who like had just not been aware of maybe some of the complexities that existed in our culture, some of the systemic evils that exist. And so for them, it was like, oh my gosh, I have to become intentional right now. And then they tried to go from 0 to 60 relationally without the relationship, right? Like
without,
that. Yeah. Because that's what I observed in this one situation. It was like, oh, in fact, my apology was like, hey, I'm sorry. We had interacted, and you probably just don't remember it, and I was not trying to be that way with you. And I was like, I just really wanted to benefit.
I really wanted that paper. Yeah.
Yes. Like, I just wanted that paper.
Yeah.
And actually, I want to maybe just say something. I was trying to. The paper was on African American churches and their perspective on baptism, and how how that should impact the larger church. And which got me this last weekend. I was thinking about. I bought this book a while ago on African American slave songs, and it's basically a book that includes all the songs from written by slaves. It's all African spirituals though. It's all Christian, and so I wanted to highlight that book in an episode of one of these podcasts, but it was produced in 18 something by some white dudes, and it was interpreted by a bunch of white dudes, and I was like, oh, I don't even know if I can agree with the introduction itself. It's actually, so from a historical piece, the only good thing about it is it has the actual lyrics.
The compilation and the lyrics.
Yes. But the way that it's fleshed out, like the theology that's taken from it would probably be, I don't know. I haven't read it enough, because when I read the introduction, I was like, no. Yeah, I was like, like when you use terms like the Negro race, I'm already like,
this may not flesh out.
Well, yeah, I did not know it was from 1800 as I was reading that. So as I was reading that, I was like, wait, yeah. So anyway, point being is that there's a lot that the church can learn from different cultures and different societies. But it's like, if there's not relationship, it's just really hard to move forward, I think. And so like, I felt like, even as you were talking, I feel like my takeaway, and hopefully the takeaway from a lot of us, is just to have friends and to have relationships that are not, we're not trying to use each other, but like our genuine, authentic relationships, and
that's absolutely one big piece of it. I think that's it. And
what else though?
One thing you just said, that just to circle back to the privilege that you were talking about, like there's such privilege in not having had to be awakened to these things, right?
Yeah.
Totally.
And
I think Ramon either talked about this on the podcast or in the beginning of his book. I just started it recently, but like the privilege to be able to walk away from these conversations, and I think like that can be bothersome for those of us who, or maybe it was in Erwin's book, I forget. I'm reading a lot right now, but that's such a steady, like that's something that I would say, hey, remember that I don't get to turn this off because the last hashtag is no longer active, right? Like this is something that I'm doing and addressing every day, not even active, just because it's life as a Black woman in these United States of America, right? And so I think that's helpful, and relationship is huge. It's not the only thing, right? Like, so I'm always careful to just say, yes, let's do this on the ground locally, but also that it's a piece of the bigger puzzle as we move towards anti-racism in the church and in society. So I just wanted to just add that little bit of clarification, but because I do love relationship. And I think it's great foundationally. I just wanted to say, because some people
that's important.
Like, let's just do the one-on-one thing. I got my white friend, I got my Asian friend. I can check these boxes off. We have a rainbow coalition, and we've solved it.
But that doesn't. I mean, that's like the beginnings, right?
Yeah.
That's a start, but it's not. What you're saying is, I think, really important for people who have maybe not had to face the challenges of racism on a daily basis. Like if you're dealing with things on a regular basis all the time, then it would seem like, I don't know, it would be a problem, to be like, all right, I'm done. All right, we need to move on though.
Yeah.
Because we have a gazillion things I want to ask you. And Black History Month. Give me a quick take. I don't know, we just talked for 50 minutes or something like that. Give me a hot take. Why does it matter for you? Like, why do you think Black History Month is important?
Yeah. So in short, Black History Month has always been important. Like I said, I'm a daughter of the Black church. I was raised in the AME Zion tradition. I also went to a Black Catholic school growing up in elementary school and high school. So Black History Month has always just been a thing. I can't remember a time that we didn't celebrate it. My mom was also very intentional about, like, we're watching Eyes on the Prize. We're watching all of these things. We're, and reading a lot. And so I love the opportunity to celebrate Black culture, Black accomplishment, the Black part of the story of America, right? Black history is American history. And I'm a history major. So history is my thing. My favorite thing to do is to find a great historical book and to sit with it. And so I love it. I love what history teaches us. And I said this earlier, but there's just something like if you know a little bit more about even my personal history, it helps you to be a better friend to me, right? So knowing about the history of my people, of Black Americans, of all of it, right? It adds to the story of America. And so, I love Black History Month. I love the fun stuff this year. I'm reading, I have a bunch of book recommendations, and I'm reading a couple of books, but I'm also committed to watching really fun things for Black History Month, things that bring joy and laughter. And so there was a great article, I think the title was, 28 things you can watch this month that are about Black joy, right? And that are not about Black trauma. And so I'm committed to doing that this year.
Oh, that's great.
And I love any opportunity to send out a list of recommended books to my friends and family and the people at the Hyde Park Vineyard. So some friends were laughing at me the other day because I sent my email on February 1, I think like at 7:30 a.m. And they're like, were you up with your finger on the button? I was like, I was ready to
you were
send
like,
it.
And send.
I did. I was like, as soon as the caffeine hit the bloodstream, there were bullet points. It's a thing.
That's when I knew. That's when I knew that I was like, oh yeah, Stephanie and I are gonna be good friends.
Because I was
like, no, but I'm the same way. I'm like, oh, can I recommend a book?
Can I recommend a book?
Yeah, it's so
Can
funny.
I recommend a book? Yeah, that is definitely that's on brand for me. And so,
I am that friend.
And there's always great offerings. I mean, like in the past couple of years, the networks and the big companies, I know a bit of it is self-serving, but they do offer, so there's just so much more out there, or at least that's highlighted and in the spotlight. And so
that's such a mixed bag too. With, you talk about the self-serving nature of a lot of this it's like the example being Twitter is not brave for removing certain people off of their platform. Exactly. I'm like,
on the last day.
Did anybody not just see the last 6 years? Anybody?
Yeah.
Well before the last 4, but or even the fact that there's other people that are still on Twitter that are massively involved in human atrocities in other countries and things like that. But I think you're like with I just saw this on HBO has a whole list of Black History Month. Yeah. And part of me is like, it's HBO. I'm pretty sure.
Well, it's how I'm justifying my HBO Max. Which, just to be clear, I only got it because I wanted to watch the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air reunion. That was
it was so good.
It was so good.
Me too. Our whole family watched it, and I was like, I actually. Okay.
I cried.
I did too. Okay.
I cried. Yeah.
Because I grew up watching that show.
But that was the gateway. But then I kept it because Judas and the Black Messiah came out.
Yeah.
And then, it's a great package offering. Amazon Prime has some great stuff. Like I Am Not Your Negro is available on Prime, right? And so, I'll take it, right? I'm excited about having access to these things. But
I also realize, like, that's the tension is like I'm like, I'm sure I'm supporting some type of industrial,
some industrial complex is being supported by my.
They're oppressing somebody somewhere.
And so. That's that's my eat the meat, spit out the bones justification for that. I'm like,
good.
This is for now, or I'll add in, it's COVID Jesus, and so I need a little something.
Yeah. That's good.
So I do.
That's funny.
It's fun, and we our church has been sending out like every week resources. Donnell Weiss is going to be our guest speaker this month.
Donnell's coming on.
He's going to be our guest speaker, and so
I need to get him on my podcast.
Yeah, that would be great. Donnell.
Donnell is such a good guy. I mean, like I just have only fond. Every time I have a conversation with Donnell, I'm like, I just love. He's such a.
I
learned
a lot from him. He's such a.
He is prophetic. He's prophetic.
He is.
Like in the true Old Testament justice. He's like that guy, where he's going to ruffle your feathers probably, and it's going to be really good for you.
Yeah.
Like, or from a white perspective, I'm like, say that it hurts. It hurts. But
Yeah.
I needed to hear that. Yeah, so I need to
Yeah, so
get him on.
he's gonna come in and be our guest
Oh,
speaker.
that's
So
great.
yeah,
That's
I'm
great.
excited about that.
Will that be in person?
No, we're gonna do the
You're still,
we're still
yeah.
right. We have
Yeah.
it'll be for the live stream. We also have a Vineyard interactive service, which is via Zoom on Sunday
Oh,
morning.
okay.
So
hmm
there'll be like a mini version of his sermon played through that, and then through the
Yeah.
live stream at 10
Cool.
o'clock. And so we're looking
Well,
forward to.
out here in Calabama, we ain't got no COVID, so we're all live.
I will not comment because this will go into
Son-
posterity, and so I will just say,
Son-
here's the
sunshine.
most political thing I will say is, people wear your masks. That shouldn't be a political statement, but
I was gonna do this for you during our podcast just to
I love that.
Says love that. Hey,
love that
this is Happy Givers. Okay, the Happy
Okay.
Givers.
I'm gonna check them out.
I just wore one of these the other day, so I've got one that also says "Be kind," and I wore it on the airplane when I was flying from Minnesota or whatever. And I cannot tell you, I had at least 25 people say, "Hey, I really like your mask," and I was like. And actually wearing these masks keeps me from being mean on an airplane, because normally on an airplane I'm like, I'm like, they don't know me.
It's a nice check.
Yeah, they don't know I'm a pastor. I can do whatever I want. Don't talk to me.
Love thy neighbor. It says love thy neighbor.
Yeah, and I was like, I found this. Yeah, I found this.
Yeah.
Okay, so Black History Month. Those are some good reasons why it matters, and I'm asking all my guests this month to talk about that a little bit, because I think it's just good to hear from other people why you value it as an African American.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're a lawyer.
I am a lawyer.
I don't even know any good lawyer jokes anymore, so I can't do any. But I'm fascinated. She's like, "Because I'll kill you." Yeah, but I had never really. I had interaction with lawyers in the past, but like not enough to be able to like really know anything about them. But I've always been fascinated by lawyers, just because. It's like it's like for me, when I moved here and I became friends with a bunch of police officers, I got to do a bunch of ride-alongs, and I was like, my primary interaction with police officers before moving to Northern California was primarily negative. Mm-hmm. So moving here and meeting guys in our church and women in our community, I was like, oh, they're like followers of Jesus. They're trying to help people in these, like, they're not all bad, type of thing. So it was really going on a ride-along was really helpful. Same thing. I had the same interest in lawyers, because it's like you live in a different world, and I just haven't been exposed to it. So would you like talk a little bit about, you mentioned earlier how there was congruency in your commitment to justice. Maybe you could even define that for us. And then also your vocation as a lawyer, like what's it like, how does your faith influence your vocation as a person of the law?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I love being a lawyer. I really do. And as I mentioned, this is my second career, right? And so, but I've been in the legal field for years. I was a legal assistant for about 17 years before I started law school, and continued in that role throughout law school. How does my faith inform my work? I think. So I'm the same person no matter what I'm doing, or at least I should be, right? Like I should be the same person with the same values informing all that I do, right? And so I currently work for the city of Chicago. My title is Assistant Inspector General, and our office, what we do is we investigate corruption, we investigate misconduct, waste, et cetera, in city government. So we are an independent agency, right? Like that provides oversight to make sure actors are doing good things, good government. Which is right up my alley, right? Like I love order, I love rules, and so when the rules are broken, we come in and shine that light, right? That just fits with my personality. Just as a FYI, I do love the work.
Do you have siblings? Just out of curiosity.
I do. I have a little sister. And
did you tattletale on her a lot? Just
it's
tell
not
the truth.
Tattletelling.
Oh no, that's my language. But did you?
That's just an unfair characterization of what was happening. I was encouraging
justice,
a home of order and justice. And so if I had to bring,
fair enough.
You know what I'm saying? If I had to bring the justice judge my mom into the situation. But we didn't always have to get there. And I hope I'm going to let my sister listen to this. We'll see if you get some comments about like.
Yeah. Hey, tell your sister I would like to interview her about this interview.
Yeah,
there you go.
I'm sure she'll look back on those days fondly. For her good. And so I here's what I bring, right? Like you asked a definition of justice. And for me, doing justice in a Christ-like way or from a Christ-like biblical foundation is just making things right? Like setting things right where there have been wrongs, correcting them, bringing shalom, right? Bringing welfare, not just the absence of injustice. Doing biblical justice is an affirmative act, of bringing wholeness, bringing goodness and bringing welfare, and absolutely seeking peace and shalom. And I love the word. When I learned, like, the word peace is so, I don't want to say bland, but it's just not as full, right?
It's lost. It's lost its
some
bite.
of the luster, some of the bite, but what it means to seek the wholeness of someone, of a person, of a system. And so that's how I try to approach everything that I do in the church and at work. It's the same value. So if there's a person at work who's a subject, how am I approaching this case, not just as another case, another number? I still do have to perform and do well at work, right? And working excellently is a part of it. It's a value, right? Like Gino used to say all the time, like, that Christians should be the best workers, right, at an organization. And so I take that. One of my favorite quotes is, excellence does not require perfection. And again, as an Enneagram 3, I have to remind myself of that. But I do try to take and work from a place of excellence to glorify God in my work. And part of that is seeking shalom, seeking the peace of my city, right? Seeking the peace of Chicago through saying, no, government can be better. Government should be better. There should not be theft. There should not be waste. And so that's just how I approach it. But I try to approach everything like that. And it's not always easy. And I haven't gotten an A+ in that. There are still, things I'm learning about, like supply chains and food chains, right? Where I'm like, oh, this is an unjust practice that I'm, even how we were joking earlier, right? Like about HBO Max and stuff like that. But those are things that we do need to think about as believers, like where we're removed from things. So it's easier for me to like not lose sleep. You know what I'm saying? Like over things.
Yeah.
Goal, I would just say, for me, is to try to approach everything from that way of loving my neighbors that I can see, can't see, neighbors that I don't particularly care for, neighbors that I find ridiculous, neighbors that without Christ I would hate. You know what I'm saying? And so, I just take that into my work. And I think being a lawyer, listen, I definitely drank the Kool-Aid like the first week of law school when they're like, being a lawyer is a noble profession. So I do cringe at lawyer jokes because I get there, I get it. A couple of them are funny. There have been like one or two in the history of the world that have been funny. Who was it that said, what was it, a Roman philosopher who said, like, first of all, let's kill all the lawyers? Like, that's so rude. But I'm saying, I do think like lawyers can do really, really good, right? Like our expertise in society and navigating systems, right? Using our words, we use words, we write a lot. I write all day. So doing that to the glory of God is just, that's how I want to approach it. Is how it's aspirationally how I like to approach it. And just want to do good. I just want to do good and not do harm.
I think that's really there is a virtue and a nobility about pursuing justice, I think, and as much as I, because I am clearly not the guy. I like to argue, but that's about the only aspect of lawyering that I would be probably good at.
But a tiny part of what we do.
Yeah, I know that. That's what I'm saying. That's the only part that I would want to do. But I think there's a nobility in pursuing justice, and because I always think like shalom is a great. When you talk about how it's got a little bit of oomph to it. I think of the same way of makarios is the Greek word for blessed, right? The idea of blessed are those who the Beatitudes.
Yeah,
and it's more than just being happy. Like there's a it affects the whole being. Biblical joy. the kind of joy that we experience. And I think the same thing is true about peace and justice, that there's something really beautiful when vindication is an interesting thing that I encountered when I was in grad school. I was reading this, I can't remember her name, but she was a Korean theologian talking about vindication and how in a lot of circles, like vindication is like, oh, that's bad. You shouldn't seek vindication, because that's like you're not forgiving them. And I don't know. It just seemed like that was I just realized that was an influence I had, where I saw vindication as almost like it's vindictive,
vengeance,
and
right, which is different.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was really all tied in together. But this particular theologian, she was talking about just how some of the atrocities that had happened in the past in Korea, and how a lot of Christians during that time leaned into the Psalms, and the psalmist's emphasis on vindication being a promise from God that gave them hope. And I just realized, I was like, man, I hadn't even thought about that. And now when I read the Psalms, I can't help but that like jumps off the pages of the Psalms to me.
Vindicate me, oh Lord, right? Like
yes.
Yeah, sure.
And that, I think, again highlights some of the privilege that I've had in my life, because like vindication wasn't a big, like I haven't had a lot of situations in my life where I'm like, Lord, vindicate me, I have been oppressed. Like, I haven't, like I got a latte once that did not have the 3 shots I ordered, and I was pretty
you were ready
angry.
to like flip over tables, right?
Yeah, I was ready to write them Psalms, but on the real, like that, that I think is an interesting thing about the Bible. There's a book that I have to recommend, and I think you've read it or you are, but Reading the Bible While Black.
Yeah.
And Esau is, it is. It's the book is, first of all, he's Anglican, so I just am like,
we
love you. Yeah,
how we I have that same passion for the Anglicans. Yeah,
I told one of my leaders, because we use the Book of Common Prayer a lot around here, and I'm the most Anglican non-Anglican, like that's what you need to know about me.
I'm right behind you. I generally send you my angle. Yeah, I think he's on my mind because his writing, I always feel like we're
I know. I'm like, we hang out every weekend. I'm
listening to your podcast. I feel like
but his book, I think, really is one of the many things, is just to read scripture through a different lens. And I think it's probably good for everybody, like to read scripture through a different lens than your typical. You'll start to see, like what I've found is I see the humanity in other cultures and other ethnicities in a way that's different than I had while reading it as me and my culture. So shout out to that book. I think that's a great book. All right. Well, I know you've got to get going. We have to do this again because we have to. There's like 1,000 things. I've got like 1,000 things I want to talk to you about. But for everybody who is new to the Stephanie world, you are on Twitter, and folks can follow you there, right? Yes. If they get past your gate, if you accept them.
If I choose to accept, but yes. You find me on Twitter.
So it's at the Steph Snow is your Twitter. You are online on Twitter, and then you participate in your local church quite a bit. And I just really appreciate you and your friendship and all that you are doing, I think, for the Vineyard movement. But I think just the church at large is really, benefits from your thinking. I also forgot to mention, you helped our region. We did something. It was a prayer vigil, an online prayer vigil, which I never thought I'd say the words online prayer vigil, but you helped our region do that, and that was really, really great. And I think having your coaching and your help was really great for Rose, our regional leader. So shout out to Rose.
Yeah, shout out to Rose. And the upcoming, there's an upcoming Color of Compromise group that's happening in your region that I'll be part of.
You're coaching. You're participating in that, correct?
One of the facilitators. Yeah. So teaching.
Is that the technical term, facilitator?
That's the term I'm using. It's a technical term, I think.
Have you noticed how terms change? It's like coach, facilitator, director. Yeah,
I'm the facilitator.
Yeah, exactly. Like it used to be senior pastor, now it's lead pastor. No one's senior pastor's old people. It's lead pastor.
These terms, I can't keep up.
I know. Seriously.
Yeah.
But hey, thanks so much for being a part of the podcast. For our listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in. We're going to keep on keeping on. If you enjoy this podcast, I'd love to encourage you to leave a review. You can do that on Apple or all the different social media platforms that you get at. That'd help get the word out a lot. Stephanie, thank you so much. I'm going to let you say the last words if you want to sign us off.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to have been here. Thank you. And I just want to encourage people. I know this work is messy and challenging, and sometimes we are afraid when we don't see fruit, but keep doing it, keep pressing in, not just invite Jesus, ask him to help us join in what he's doing. And there will be fruit in this life, I believe, and in the eschaton. And so that's it. Blessings to every listener.
Thank you.